Tiger Woods brought so many people to golf, and not just brought people to golf because he was just like an interesting personality. He dominated. Caitlin Clark is doing stuff you haven't seen. And then now this comes down to, and I know this is another long background, she has received more vitriol and hatred than I have ever seen someone receive in sports.
Hello, and welcome to the Will Spencer Podcast. This is a weekly interview show where I sit down and talk with authors, thought leaders, and influencers who help us understand our changing world. New episodes release every Friday. My guest this week is Jon Root. Jon built his career in sports and entertainment through his personality, work ethic, and sports knowledge. In 2016, he became one of the youngest hosts in major professional sports as the San Jose Sharks and Santa Cruz Warriors in-arena host and digital reporter, becoming a Bay Area fan favorite. He also produced Off Days, the most viewed video series in Sharks history. Due to the over-politicization of sports, Jon joined Turning Point USA as a contributor, hosting Breakaway, which is non-woke sports talk, and TP USA Live, which is daily political news and entertainment. A strong conservative grounded in Christian faith, he creates an outlet for conversations not seen elsewhere in sports media. Jon believes sports brings people together and views his career as a blessing while continuing to work with major brands, teams, and networks. Jon Root, welcome to the Will Spencer Podcast.
Thanks so much for having me. Appreciate you.
Man, I've really been looking forward to this conversation. I've enjoyed, since I've gotten to know you and follow you, your outspoken stance on many issues related to sports and also faith as well. And there's a lot going on right now for us to talk about, which is perfect timing in many ways.
Yeah, it's definitely a crazy time. And a little bit more background on me too is, I worked in sports because it was an outlet away from politics. And it used to be a lot of fun and not as polarizing and divisive. And then I eventually got canceled. So my, path to try to work for a major network was gone. Then I worked for Turning Point. And in the conservative circles, they have a certain thought about how much is it worth talking about sports. And then you see the women's sports issue that we can chat about too, that sports are a cultural driver. And there's a lot of people that are actually pretty bold about their Christian faith in sports. And it seems like, maybe we can call it a revival that's happening in sports, so to speak. And now I get to talk about all this stuff independently. I can't cancel myself. And I love being as bold as I am, and God's given me an amazing platform. And then I get to meet people like you. It's awesome what I get to do.
Well, I appreciate you being outspoken on these things because I've never been a giant sports fan myself. Like, I enjoy watching sports when it comes up. But one of the things that I think all of us have noticed is the increasing politicization of sports, whether it be on the field or off the field. And it seems like we can't just enjoy a good sporting competition anymore without it being something to push political values through us, woke political values. And it's incredibly frustrating because where are we supposed to turn to get away from the crazy?
Well, and then even right now, just look at what Pride Nights have turned into. Pride Nights,
Yeah.
I feel like in general, I've never as a Christian supported Pride Night. But I also, when I worked for some of these teams, they respected the fact that anytime as an in-arena host, as a personality for the team, I said, I'm not going to be involved in any ad reads, any sort of promotion of this. I'm not going to wear the gear. I'm not going to promote that stuff. And it was respectful. But now it's gotten to a place where you have to wear that jersey, player. And if you don't wear that jersey or put pride tape on your stick or, become an ally of the community, you're a hateful, bigoted, homophobe, transphobe, blah, 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 blah. But Pride Night started out as a, let's just say, celebration of marriage equality. Now you're seeing drag queens that are just flaunted in front of kids at games. The New York Mets, they just celebrated their Pride Night, and during the national anthem, they got a cutaway on the big screen of the pride flag, and then they got two dudes making out that they're showing on the Jumbotron. It's become just debauchery, and obviously we can talk about the race war that's going on, that's just so nonsensical. DEI is infused in sports where certain teams can actually get compensation for hiring a minority coach. Like this is crazy stuff that's going on in sports. And for me, I feel God's given me a platform to speak against these things because sports has the ability to bring us together, maybe unlike any other outlet out there. And I mean, just even look at 9/11. I know this is a long little speech I have right here about sports, Will, but people look
Please
to
go ahead.
sports to unify. They want to go to a game after something like 9/11 and be like, wow, I might not have voted for George Bush or care about the guy or like Republicans or politics in general, but him throwing that first pitch, just an absolute dart right down the middle. Everybody can be like, I felt patriotic that day. I felt like I could come together with my fellow Americans and enjoy a baseball game. I could enjoy a football game. And I feel like that's what we need to get back to. But media isn't helping. A lot of these woke athletes like Steph Curry, woke coaches like Greg Popovich and Steve Kerr, LeBron James, the list goes on. And Simone Biles. I know a lot of people are familiar with that situation recently. I mean, sports has become really polarizing. But at the same time, maybe for the first time in a long time, maybe within the last decade, we've seen the most pushback and conversation around these things when leftist media was trying to squash it for a long time. So it's tough, but maybe we're seeing a turning of the tide.
Hmm. Well, let's talk a little bit about that pushback because I remember there was the Los Angeles Dodgers player who was forced to wear the pride hat but put the Genesis verse on it, and I saw that. I'm like, fantastic! I'm glad he did that. And then I got to thinking about like, wow, he must have gotten some major pushback, from maybe from the administration, the baseball administration, like MLB as well, from his own teammates. Like, is some of that percolating in the background?
So what we've now gotten to, what I brought up earlier, is basically Christians are put between a rock and a hard place. And Pride nights in general, I don't think anybody should be forced to wear LGBTQ pride gear at all.
Yeah.
And if you refuse to it, that doesn't make you a bad person. I mean, I don't think it's as good for sports. I don't think it's good for kids. I don't think it's good for society in general. But let's even go back years prior. There were multiple players on the Tampa Bay Rays that decided they weren't going to wear pride gear at all. And they got annihilated. And this was during Biden's presidency. And I think that was actually, maybe set a standard for what Christian athletes should do. And then other Christian athletes like James Reimer, the backup goalie for the San Jose Sharks a few years ago, ended up saying, I'm not going to wear it. And then, just respectfully, I don't hate anybody. And then let's fast forward to Clayton Kershaw. This is about a couple years after the Dodgers celebrated the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence. So if
Hmm.
people are, that maybe rings a bell. If it doesn't, they are a radical, blasphemous group that does a like Jesus drag show at Easter in San Francisco, and they were getting a community service award. They were being honored by the Dodgers, and there was a big protest. And for me, during that time, I was saying, okay, the Dave Roberts, the manager of the Dodgers, calls himself a Christian. He didn't say a word, nothing. And he didn't like, and he wore all the pride gear. And actually, Clayton Kershaw, who I'm very thankful and I think should definitely be supported for what he wrote on his pride hat this year, actually wore the pride gear that season. Uh, and I'm glad to see,
Mm.
courage begets courage. You understand that well. I understand that. Anybody watching and listening. Um, so I don't mean to be dogging on Clayton, but there was a time where I think he could have made an amazing stand in a really tumultuous time, and he decided to cower. But there was another pitcher, Blake Trinan. But in general, I know this is a lot of backstory with this stuff, but it seems like it's now coming to a place where it's like, yes, Clayton Kershaw, this is what we've been asking for you to do. This is what the Bible calls you to do. And in general, there might be the people that say, he shouldn't have wore the pride hat at all. And it's like, Yeah, I can, I can definitely agree with that. But the fact that he was able to point people to scripture to say, hey, we're not like reclaiming the rainbow. God didn't give this symbol up. He didn't give up this symbol of his covenant that he'll never flood the earth again. The rainbow has always been about God, and it's been designed by God. And marriage is designed by God and made by God. And we need to respect his perfect order. And luckily, we're starting to see athletes, point people back to Christ. And even simple gestures like that, I think, are really important. And though Clayton Kershaw has seemingly kind of been a cowardice in years prior, I'm really, really thankful that he stood up for what the rainbow actually represents.
And I've noticed that there have been a number of other athletes who, when they win championships or win big games, particularly championships, they're not afraid to get on the microphone and say, I give thanks to my Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. They say that and they really seem to mean it. And what a statement that is, for a world that hates Christ to begin with, but also in the political environment where we're in, where people are being forced to wear pride flags. Like, no, I'm going to stand up. And in this moment, when everyone's watching, I'm going to make a profession of faith. It's incredibly inspiring to see that.
And I think it gets the wheels turning for a lot of people that are like, wow, you've been waiting your whole life to win a Stanley Cup, to win a Super Bowl, to win a World Series, to win a college football national championship. And your first thought is giving praise, honor, and glory to your Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. That gets people thinking like, wow, like you're doing this for more than just yourself, more than just your team and your family and your community and your state and the previous players. You're doing this for the person that deserves all the glory. And it's so, so cool. It fires me up anytime I hear that stuff. I got to pause the TV, rewind if I can't rip it offline. And I'm telling like my wife and I are watching the game or with buddies. It's like, I got to record this and I got to put it out there. And that stuff goes viral because people are resonating with that. They're like, this is awesome. These are the people I want to point my kids to and say, hey, win or lose, this is who I want to see you be like. And then obviously we get in the conversation. There's the naysayers that are like, well, I guess God liked this team so much more. And it's like, but that actually does lead to an interesting conversation that it's like, no, actually, here's a ton of other clips of players and coaches giving God the glory and the honor he deserves in defeat, in really tough defeat. And I love seeing it. And then even shout out to my buddy Spencer Danielson. He's the head coach for Boise State football, who had an unbelievable run to the college football playoff last year. They had Ashton Genty, who got runner up for the Heisman. I thought he deserved the Heisman. No offense to Travis Hunter. But Spencer Danielson, I mean, he was talking about Jesus every single interview. And then when they won the Mountain West Championship, it's like this stuff. And obviously you can understand how excited I am because I'm excited right now. I love it.
Hmm.
It is so, so amazing to see athletes who have these amazing platforms point people to Christ. And that aspect of sports, I think, is something worth fighting for. And I hope the people out there that are like, I'm sick and tired of the wokeness of sports. So am I. I feel like that's why we need to amplify these voices. And the people that we don't like are the face of the NBA, the NHL, MLB. Maybe start amplifying some of these other voices and, have these people go viral. It's really cool to see. And it fires me up.
You mentioned something that I wanted to just divert into it for a moment because I think it's a great question. It's something that the atheists and secularists always say, like, both sides are praying to God to win. Like, does God pick favorites? Does God really care who wins versus the Browns versus the Bears? Like, let's address that because I mean, I think the question has a goofy, silly aspect to it, but I think that there's actual some real potential for theological depth in there as well of what's actually going on.
And as Christians, we're supposed to do everything to the glory of God. Everything. And
Yep.
it gets down to this place where it's like, well, does God play favorites? And in general, now we're seeing both in victory and defeat players and coaches saying, I thank God for the opportunity. I thank God for giving me a body that's able to compete at the highest level, you know, when people are talking about professional sports, or in an incredibly high level when they're talking about college sports. And it gets people's wheels turning to be like, oh, okay, like, so you're saying your identity is not in being a football player, your identity is in Christ, and that no matter what, God does deserve the glory, and that God is not, punishing a team because, they're not as close to him. They're not praying as much, or they're not as moral as the other team. We start to get out of that aspect, and I think hopefully pointing people to like what Paul is saying, what is faith? It's a race. And we're supposed to run that race to win. And we're supposed to like, not everybody is going to be running the race of faith and have the same abilities, opportunities as others, but you are going to put in your full effort and you're going to do everything to the glory of God. A lot of us that have played sports, even just work out in general, we will see other people that have better bodies than us, better metabolism than us, but we definitely know the people that, though they might have some hiccups, physically, biologically, they're working their butt off, and they're doing everything they can to the best of their ability. And hopefully that starts pointing people to faith, where it's like, oh, that starts to make sense. Like, no matter what, I'm not saying that, oh, God must not love me because we didn't win this game, or God doesn't love me because I wasn't able to hit that big shot. And those kind of conversations, obviously, sometimes social media isn't the best place to have those, but there have been a few of
What?
those where they're like, oh, now that I've tried to like troll you to say, oh, no athletes, thanking God after they lose. Now I'm seeing multiple videos, and now my wheels are turning. Now I'm maybe interested in this Jesus thing. Maybe I am, as Brandon Lake would say, the Bubba out there that's going to go to church, but hopefully that church is not going to dumb down their worship for you. And it gets people interested in like, oh, I got a Christian friend or family member, and maybe I should look into that athlete's faith and everything. So it does lead to a lot of really good discussions, and hopefully people start to realize that these athletes are doing this for more than a paycheck, more than the accolades. They're doing it for Jesus.
Yeah, there's something very real about physical gifts. When I think it's difficult for people who are not athletes to conceive of just not just the amount of work that athletes put into, say, become a professional, but the amount of just gifts that the average person doesn't have. Like I think about, I think it's at the NFL Combine where they have this overlay where they show they show a running back doing the 40, and then they overlay it with the image of like an average person doing the 40, so you can see how even an average fit person, and it's like literally night and day. Like they're almost superhuman in their ability. And when you hear someone like that talking about their faith, even in defeat, like I used my gifts, I practiced my faith, I was very sincere, and we didn't win today because that was God's choice. But the willing submission to that, and to recognize that God is sovereign and he has his reasons, I think truly inspires faith in people who don't just associate faith with victory, because you can lose in faith as well. And that's part of it.
Well, and that gets into the gospel aspect of, you know, what are Christ followers promised? Hardship. Like it's
Yeah.
gonna be hard. And I love if anybody's seen the Babylon Bee, where they had like basically this is what atheists thought the disciples would be doing. It's like, no, what we should do is we should steal the body, and then we should fake all this, and then everybody's like, yeah, so we become like rich and famous. No, we're gonna die brutal deaths. And it's like it's so good because the gospel aspect of, you know, we're gonna be persecuted. We're gonna suffer. And, but we do that for the sake of Christ. Like we don't go out there and, try to preach some sort of like poverty gospel, or just, look to get persecuted and, whipped in the streets, so to speak, and online. But, we are gonna go through hard times if we're truly following Christ and standing up for his word and our Lord and Savior. And hopefully people start to realize that too, where, what, there is the ultimate victory. You might not see as, obviously you got plenty of prosperity gospels out there that say, like, if you pray enough or you give enough, you're going to receive tenfold. And you got the Paul Whites out there that say that, and Joel Osteen, Kenneth Copeland. Get people out of that theology to be like, no, like ultimately we're doing this for Christ. And though we might not see the materialism that would essentially make things more comfortable, living the American dream, we're fighting for eternity. And that is in perfect relationship with Jesus Christ. In our heavenly bodies, no more pain, no more suffering. And hopefully people start to realize that. And that's why I think there's even times where I don't have, physical ailments myself. But there is times where, some athletes and people we know that might not even be athletes, they're some of the most joyous, humble, giving people, and they can't even walk or they can't even
Yeah.
run like they used to. And they're still like, you know what? This is what was meant to happen. And I can't wait to be in my heavenly body, but I'm going to make the most out of the body that God's given me. And I'm not going to moan about all this stuff. And I'm going to make the best out of it. And I think that's why, there's even people like my friend Justin Peters. I was just on his podcast, and,
Hmm.
I was talking about my time at Turning Point USA and everything. And he's got a great testimony. Like he's got a major physical ailment, and he got to the point where he realized God's not going to heal me. And that's a part of my
Mm.
testimony. And I think that stuff is beautiful, and it can almost make even more of an impact than someone that is totally physically intact. But when we have athletes that are the upper echelon, like you talked about, even some of these offensive linemen are faster than the average individual. And these guys weigh like 340 pounds and they're 6'6".
Yeah.
But they realize that it's a blessing to have the body they have and be able to play a kid's game for a living. And they give glory to God for it. And I think it means a lot.
I think that's ultimately one of the reasons why many people enjoy sports is that they recognize something that is objectively clear that they cannot do, that doesn't necessarily in itself have a moral value. Like sports is physical performance, right? And it's not immoral, it's not necessarily amoral, but I can watch someone throw a shot put or whatever, and like I can just appreciate it for what it is without having to assign it some cosmic kind of value in the same way that art or something like that does. And there's this great leveling that we can all appreciate that and look at someone who's capable of doing something by God's grace, by his gifts to them, that we admire, and we can look at God's glory in that. And to hear more athletes, especially in such a challenging political environment, stand up and say, no, this is the truth. This is who I am. This is what I believe. And to start to bring those values back into this conversation, I think is so necessary, because there's just people just let that go for a long time, and they let pride flags show up, and they let DEI show up, and they let, equity and all these different other things show up. It's like, no, I'm going to stand with my gifts for these values in front of everybody on the biggest stage. And I think that should inspire all of us to do it in our own ways.
And then that's where we can get to even comparing to the Simone Biles versus Riley Gaines situation. You know, am I able to
Mm.
are you going to put this on YouTube? Can I use certain words, or is that going to demonetize you? Is that
I usually put it on YouTube, so I don't know
okay?
I don't know
So
what the words
I
are.
think in general, I try to be careful too with if you're throwing this stuff on YouTube. I don't want obviously what it comes down to is there's unfair competition in women's sports. That's what we're
Oh, I
seeing.
see.
And um, we know that what is happening from a foundational level, it is anti-God. And people like Simone Biles, they're talking about competitive equity. Like, sports are not about diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Yeah.
Even from a young age, you know, boys and girls sports is still unfair. But when we definitely get to
Mhm.
that higher competition, it is wildly unfair. And it will always be unfair. And if you have one of the biggest female athletes in the history of sports, in the history of the world, is saying she's fighting for competitive equity, competition is not about equity. Sports are about meritocracy. The
Yep.
best athlete wins the gold. The best team wins the gold. The best athlete is going to get that roster spot. The best coach should be getting the coaching position. And when we get down to, like I was mentioning earlier, there's something called the Rooney Rule in the NFL. They implemented this rule where every single NFL team needs to not hire, but interview at least, I'm pretty sure it's at least one minority, whether that is an ethnic minority or a female. And they can get compensation just like the New England Patriots did for hiring Gerard Mayo because he's black. I can't think of anything more demoralizing than thinking, am I just getting invited to this interview because of an immutable characteristic? That is so stupid. That's not what sports are for. Sports are about meritocracy. And what do kids learn? And we all learn when we play sports: sportsmanship, teamwork, foundational aspects of life that for a long time employers are like, you know what? You played high level sports. I actually want you to be a part of my team. I want you to be a part of this company because you know what it's like to be selfless. You know what it's like to be on a football team. I played D2 football, nothing to write home about, nothing amazing. I played it at Azusa Pacific, but I loved it. And I understood what it was like to sacrifice for a team that the 11 guys on offense and defense, they're only as good as their weakest link. You can have 10 guys on defense, play unbelievable, but if that cornerback is asleep, that guy just ran a streak down the sideline and caught that 50-yard touchdown pass. Everybody else did their job, but you were the weak link, and now it makes the whole defense look bad. So hopefully people start to understand that sports need to get back to that. And then even from just a viewership perspective, we are so sick and tired of hearing, stuff like what we're seeing in the WNBA. Like the race conversation and pettiness and jealousy that we're seeing in that league is absolutely insane. I've never seen a league try to sabotage the ability to be profitable for the first time in the history of the WNBA. I've never seen a company or organization try to sabotage their, basically their money bag. Caitlin Clark, it is absolutely insane what we're seeing, but it does, again, as much as I hate it, hopefully it leads to an inflection point that maybe all this race talk is stupid. Maybe there is all this talk about white privilege is a load of nonsense. Maybe sports are about meritocracy. Maybe people like Caitlin Clark because she's done stuff that people have never seen in the WNBA. And people have never seen in women's college basketball. That's what it's about. And that's why, obviously, I'm still appreciative that God's given me a platform to speak out against this stuff, because hopefully during this time, we won't look back years from now and be like, wow, I really wish I would have said something. And if I would have said something and pushed back against the talking heads at ESPN, maybe we wouldn't be, you know, watching another broadcast where, it's everything is just so racially infused and everything. And especially to another degree is the women's sports thing where, there's a lot of people pushing back. Riley Gaines is a good friend of mine. And congratulations to them. They're pregnant with a baby on the way. That's so exciting. Um, but there's a lot of people working really hard to fight against the racial nonsense that's being talked about, the inequality in sports when it comes to men and women in sports. There's a lot of craziness going on, and it's a crazy time.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned Caitlin Clark because there's a video going around right now. I'm going to try and share my screen and we can watch it. Dave Rubin posted this, and this is a pretty shocking video. Dave Rubin says the WNBA has their Michael Jordan and they're kicking the S out of her. These, quote, ladies should be booted from the league today. So we'll just watch this real quick. There's not going to be any sound, but maybe we'll take a look at this clip and then you can walk us through what's going on. So she takes a shot, push, bang. Wild. Absolutely. Absolutely wild. We'll just watch it one more time. Just, oh, craziness. Craziness. So maybe John, you can, as a professional sports announcer, maybe you can walk us through, what you saw there, what's happening in that clip. It's just, I've got a lot that I could say, and maybe I will, but I wanted to get your take first.
So first and foremost, people need to understand that for the first time ever, the WNBA is being talked about. And the only reason the WNBA is being talked about by the masses, we're not talking about just like the small dedicated fans that they've had, for their decades of existence. The only reason it's being talked about is because of Caitlin Clark. Caitlin Clark set the record for most points scored in college basketball, men or women. She was shooting.
Really?
Yeah, she was shooting. And I know one guy, Pistol Pete, was up there for a long time. That's one of my favorite basketball players of all time. He's definitely not alive to see him play, but she was hitting threes from the logo. She was
I know.
shooting.
So I've seen clips.
She was shooting deeper threes and still does deeper threes than Steph Curry. And Steph Curry is the
Mhm.
most amazing shooter I have ever seen, and I think maybe the world will ever see in basketball. She is like the
Yeah.
Steph Curry of women's basketball, and also at the same time, Dave Rubin's correct, she is the Michael Jordan. There are more
Mhm.
people watching some of those games, like you just watched. The Indiana Fever is what Caitlin Clark plays for, and the Connecticut Sun, which is, I think, bottom three teams, maybe the worst team in the WNBA. Some people are watching that more than they're watching the NBA finals. She
Oh,
like
yeah.
she's like they're moving games from WNBA arenas to NBA arenas. It's crazy. Like the what she's doing from even just a economic and financial standpoint. Everybody think of Tiger Woods 20 years ago on the PGA Tour.
Mhm.
Tiger Woods brought so many people to golf, and not just brought people to golf because he was just like an interesting personality. He dominated. Caitlin
Yep.
Clark is doing stuff you haven't seen. And then now this comes down to, and I know this is another long background, she has received more vitriol and hatred than I have ever seen someone receive in sports. And if people are out there and are like, well, she got the rookie treatment last year, and, she's going to get, roughed up. There was, WNBA legends like Diana Taurasi that are just like, yeah, she's in for a rude awakening. You know, they're going to get beat up a little bit. Like that's going to happen from the veterans. But now what we're seeing is this stuff stems from jealousy, and
Yeah.
some of it, I do believe, stems from hatred. Some of it actually is racial. What is going on in the racial conversation is insane. But now what you just watched is when she was originally guarded at the beginning of that clip was someone she played against in college. She gets poked in the eye, then she gets bumped by that same player that poked her in the eye. Caitlin Clark shoves her away, nothing crazy, and then Marina Mabrey comes in and decks her. This
Yeah.
is your cash cow. And know what happened? The chick that decked her did not get ejected from the game. It shows incompetence from the highest level of the WNBA, not protecting their greatest asset they will ever have, and maybe sports will ever have. Once LeBron James, I think Colin Cowherd said this. If people are familiar with him from Fox Sports, I'm pretty sure he said it. When LeBron James and Steph Curry retire, Caitlin Clark will be the biggest athlete and the most famous basketball player in all of basketball. She will sell more
All right.
jerseys, she will sell more shoes, and she will create more conversation and have more of an economic impact than any other basketball player. And I think a lot of people are like, that's true. And then Caitlin Clark, she got cheap shotted last season. She got blindsided by a chick that was playing on Angel Reese's team. She got poked in the eye from a chick named Dejanay Carrington, who had some extra long nails and poked her in the eye last year. Like, so this isn't just like a one-off situation. She's actually getting beat up. And we're now at a place where the WNBA needs to address it, but the WNBA is terrified that they'll come to the defense of a white athlete while she is in a black league. That's where all this race conversation comes in. And it is so sad. And I wish there was better people in Caitlin Clark's corner, because what she ended up doing during the offseason is she talked to Time Magazine and she admitted she had even a little bit of white privilege. And
What?
she bowed down to the mob and, did the whole like thankful for the black women that came before me and everything. It was stupid. It was really dumb. And I think Caitlin Clark does a good job of taking the high road, but I think she needs to start to realize that she doesn't need to be a culture warrior. And I think maybe if she goes the Michael Jordan route, where Michael Jordan was famous for saying Republicans buy sneakers too, if anybody watches
Mm.
the Michael Jordan documentary on Netflix, there was a lot of people that were angry at him that he wasn't endorsing specific political candidates. I think people like Spike Lee were really mad at him, and I could be wrong on this, but even people like Al Sharpton. If Caitlin Clark goes that route, she might need to speak to some things like, men and women's sports that I think would be her voice. If she brought that up, it would be way more impactful than any other athlete speaking up. And I wish she would be courageous with that. But I think we're starting to realize that there's a major cultural significance behind what's going on with Caitlin Clark, and not just how amazing she is, setting records, rookie of the year last year. And the last thing for you, again, I know these are long things. People watching
Oh,
might be
please go
like,
ahead.
they're like, I have never heard somebody talk about the WNBA this long in my entire life. The last thing I have for you is, um, you still sports media in general is the vast majority is crazy liberal. And last
Hmm.
season, Caitlin Clark had one of the most amazing rookie seasons in the history of sports. This is not me overhyping this. Look at the stats, look at the impact. She was not the unanimous rookie of the year because one person decided to vote for Angel Reese. And that's where it comes down to, is just they need to give their flowers to the black athlete. They need to give their flowers to the chick that actually won a national championship. And hopefully we start getting to this place where the WNBA starts figuring things out. The refs actually start controlling the situation, because the conversation happening online is only going to push more people to Caitlin Clark's side and away from supporting the WNBA as a whole, or really any of its other players.
Yeah, I took a look at that clip. I was aware that I guess it was in the off season that Caitlin Clark, who I've only seen highlight reels of, and I've watched them. Like, that's like she's drilling it from the logo. Like, that
Yeah.
is a thing. I remember Steph Curry back in the day. People say he got cheat codes, right? So she got the
Yeah.
same codes. And I remember her hearing that she had said, that she has some amount of white privilege. And I was like, okay, I guess I understand why you said that, but I wish you hadn't. But then I look at something like that, and I was going to post this, but I wasn't sure of my facts. But if we were to see that same kind of play in the NBA, men and women are the same, right? We're equal. If we were to see the same kind of play where, like, strip race out of it and just make it all men, they can be purple for all I care, right? And you had a star player get poked in the eye, shoved, and then decked, what would happen to the male player who decked the other male player? What would happen to that guy if he just hard shove onto the floor? They'd get fined, they'd get ejected, they'd probably get suspended, right, for doing that. But I watched that clip and no one seemed particularly troubled by this 1000% unsportsmanlike conduct to an elite star player. Like, it was just like, we just went on, like you said, she didn't even get ejected. I did see it. Maybe she got fined or something like that. But if men and women are the same, why aren't we equally applying the rules here? There's a flagrant violation of sportsmanlike conduct, but we're supposed to overlook it. Why? Like, do we really believe that men and women are the same? Of course, we don't actually believe that. Of course, we have to protect, the DEI and all that. But it was such astounding hypocrisy laid bare right there, because they would never tolerate that in the NBA. Never, ever tolerate that, even for average players.
And what you'd see in the NBA too is you would see a scuffle, maybe even more than that. And then that's that's what you see in sports as men. Like, I've been in plenty of scuffles, and then afterwards, like, really after the game, you're dapping each other up, showing them good game, and you leave it on the field, and that's it. Like, I mean, you had some like really crazy sports moments I have and other people where it's just like, that's just sports. But with the women here, what we're seeing again, it comes down to pettiness and jealousy. That's it.
Yeah.
And then the craziest part was Caitlin Clark got a technical.
No,
They
she didn't.
actually gave her a technical foul for what happened there. And like, you can't explain that. But at the same time, too, Marina Mabrey that decked Caitlin Clark wasn't kicked out of the game. And those are kind of things um, and I mean, this is maybe a stretch, but for people to understand from a political perspective, I'm from California. I now live in Phoenix, Arizona, but I see a place like San Francisco that has allowed so much crime and debauchery to just go unchecked. And that's what happens from even a political standpoint and a crime standpoint is you are now telling people you can steal as long as it's, less than, $500 or $800, whatever it is in San Francisco. And then now,
Yep.
and again, I know this isn't apples and oranges. You're probably gonna be like, John, you're making like too much of a political point for this. I think it's similar in the
No.
sense of, this is undisciplined children. So if Mabry is able to do this to Caitlin Clark, and people have been doing this since she entered the league, other players, who's to say another player's gonna be like, well, if I can get away with a cheap shot against this chick that I can't stand is actually getting the limelight, even though she's the only reason I'm on the chartered flight to Indiana when I had to take coach for the last decade playing in the WNBA. They'll be like, yeah, I can get away with it, and I will. What's the WNBA going to do when Caitlin Clark actually gets injured? Because she was injured for about 2 weeks. She hurt, and that was not because of somebody cheap shotting her. Some of it's just like sports are tough. It's physical. But if she actually gets hurt, the WNBA is screwed. They're done.
Yeah.
She's the only reason that people watch games. She's the only reason that people are interested in seeing. The only reason they're interested in seeing these other players is when Caitlin Clark is playing them, whether they're actually buying tickets to go to the game or watching on TV. And that's it. And they just have to own up to it. And still at the same time, we can celebrate athleticism and athletic feats, but people are drawn to the WNBA because of Caitlin Clark. And that's what it is. And I just recognize it. Who cares if she's white, black, purple, whatever? Like, we didn't have this conversation with Tiger Woods. People weren't saying like, yeah, I really feel like supporting Tiger Woods just because he's black. It was interesting that a black guy was, really taking, half black, half Japanese, I think. And
Filipino.
But in general, it's like he was just transformative to the sport. He was so fun to watch. And that's what hopefully people see in Caitlin Clark, that what she's doing is transcending race, transcending just athleticism and financials, everything. It's really cool to see, and hopefully people start getting out of their racial idolatry and just start accepting, maybe I should just enjoy watching this chick play basketball. That's it.
Yeah, that's the thing that strikes me about that clip, is that there's something about that feels personal. It's not just like stuff happens on the field, men's tempers get heated and we get some conflict, but it's not personal. That clip, looking at that, feels personal, and that's ugly. And I don't like that when I see that in men's sports. I like it even less when I see it in women's sports, but that's not what it's supposed to be. Again, like you can watch like every baseball season, there's always one bench clearing brawl. You know what I mean? But like, hopefully, it doesn't start some vendetta between the two players, although that has happened in the past. But it never really feels personal. It feels like something that happened just on the field that day, and then they go on about their lives. That felt personal, and I appreciate this because I hadn't realized that I can't think of a single figure in any professional sport right now whose name I've heard as much as Caitlin Clark. Now, I don't follow sports, like I just see what kind of surfaces, but you're right. I hear Caitlin Clark's name mentioned positively. And if you were to ask me about pro football or basketball or like, okay, but Rory is one of the golfers. Like, I
Roy
don't mean to
McIlroy, yeah.
show my ignorance, but that's right. Didn't he just won the Masters, and I saw that clip,
Yep.
and that was pretty powerful. As he's walking off the 18th hole, like fighting back tears. I'm like, yeah, that like, so I know his name, but there are so few stories of elite athletes these days. It feels like it absolutely gets drowned out by the political conversation, by the drama. And so here now we have an athlete who's actually achieving at the highest level and doing incredible things. And what surrounds her is just trying to drag her down like in the crab bucket. And it's baffling to me. And it must be extra hard for you as a man who's worked in professional sports, as a sports fan, just to see, is it low caliber of play? Is it, coaches and teams being distracted? Like, what is it? There must still be good players, but no one's really doing the Michael Jordan or Larry Bird thing anymore, or the, A-Rod thing. I don't see that as often anymore, but maybe that's just me.
I think people have to realize that politics has been a major detriment to sports, especially what
Yeah.
happened in 2020. There's a lot of people
Okay.
that, I mean, everybody was home and we were looking for an outlet away from the craziness of life. All the COVID conversation and, crazy politics and, friends and family are getting sick and we don't know what's going on. And then we turn on the TV and the WNBA is doing a boycott for Jacob Blake. The NBA is canceling games and promoting Marxist Black Lives Matter. The NFL is pushing some of that same nonsense too, where it's like anti-police rhetoric. And people are like, this just feels like another politics news outlet. I want to watch Patrick Mahomes do Patrick Mahomes things. I want to
Mhm.
watch, Steph Curry, even though I can't stand his politics, I just want to see him shoot the lights out from 3 all game. And what we got was a lot of networks, athletes, coaches, and organizations preaching to us nonsense. And people are like, I can't do it anymore. I can't see guys kneeling for the anthem anymore. They don't even seem proud to be Americans. They're just a bunch of spoiled brats that are making millions of dollars and trying to preach at me and tell me about what it means to be a good person and that I need to, hate America, forever or at least for a time. Like, it was a weird time. And I think now we've gotten to a place where the NBA brand took a major hit. And the,
Mm.
the the NBA brand is very liberal, and then the most liberal left wing sports organization or sports league is the WNBA. I mean, you have
Mhm.
some of the craziest, wonkiest people, especially in their fan base. I mean, it's just a ton of lesbians and a ton of left wing activists. And then the NFL, it'll always be the cash cow for Americans. Americans are willing to give the NFL more of a longer leash. Um, and Major League Baseball, it would be a full different conversation that would bore you and your audience talking about how the MLB just does not know how to market itself. And they haven't given
Huh.
the opportunity for people to watch their product. And they've had broadcasting rights issues. And, for a time before Shohei Ohtani, like, do you know who Shohei Ohtani is? Have you heard that name?
Japanese pitcher.
Yes. Japanese pitcher
Mhm.
and DH for the Dodgers. But if I asked people a couple years ago, who Shohei Ohtani was, like people that just like maybe dabble in sports, they'd be like, yeah, probably kind of heard of him. He's the Babe Ruth of our era. Like he is like what
What?
he's doing. He just hit 50 home runs, 50 plus home runs, and stole 50 plus bases last season. No one's ever done it. And
Wait,
that's where
what?
there's a lot of great athletes. But another thing too is I think especially American sports are struggling because how many American born sports stars are there? There's not a lot. I think that's
Really?
something too that like people sure bring in the race conversation, but in general, people like look at what happened with the Four Nations hockey tournament. People like cheering for their country, and it brought a lot of people together that might not even care about hockey. And it was great animosity and competition. But a lot of these leagues, the NBA, you know, who are some of the biggest stars? Luka
Oh,
Doncic, um,
yep.
Shea Gilgeous-Alexander, who's on the cusp of winning the NBA Finals and just won the MVP. Um, you got Nikola Jokic, Luka Doncic, SGA, and then Major League Baseball. There's a lot of foreign stars, and I think that's where leagues are kind of struggling a little bit right now. And that's why I think more people are kind of drawn to the NFL. It's like you got that American born star.
Hmm.
And I think that might not be the biggest aspect of it, but I think it's another factor that plays in as well as politics that have really turned people out. And not saying that people don't want to watch international stars, um, but there is a little bit of a disconnect with the international stars playing in an American sport. Again, it's not the biggest thing, but I think it's an interesting factor.
I never would have considered that, but it makes sense. Like American football is just not popular around the world. It's kind of like it doesn't make sense to many people around the world. Like you kind of got to be an American to get it.
The
And
Super Bowl
you're
is like a
right about
holiday. It's like a holiday here, and like around the world, people are like, like whatever. Like more people watch Premier League. They just, but I
that's
could
right.
care less. And there's a lot of people in America that do like the Premier League, but in general, like the Super Bowl's always going to be way bigger, and that's what's always interesting. Is like we're in that specific ecosystem, and American sports thrive in certain ways that other sports won't. And I think it's an interesting aspect that's not talked about enough.
No, I think you're right because there is a big conversation happening right now around immigration.
Yeah.
Although the conversation is more about illegal immigration, there is something to be said about, of course, I fully appreciate and respect athletes around the world who achieve at the highest level on
Yep.
earth. Nothing to take away from that. But I can certainly understand how there's something very different about, like, hey, we are Americans, and there is something about being American that is unique. And while are happy to invite people to come over and compete, who are we, and can, in a way, can we have something for ourselves? And that's a controversial idea, I know, but I mean it shouldn't be. And I can understand how it would be impacting probably baseball first, because baseball has always been very international, with Puerto Rico especially,
Yep.
and Japan lately, and then basketball with Eastern Europe. But American football, like, that's our thing. And
Yeah.
but part of that is no one's going to grow up around the world playing American football. Like, you're not going to get to an elite level playing American football, because who are you going to compete against to raise to that level?
Exactly. And that's where people can hopefully start to understand this conversation more through the lens of let's go back to Shohei Ohtani. Like I still to this day, I wish there was people in his corner, and people, might get upset at me for this, but um like you need to learn English. If he learned English and actually took the proper time to learn English, he would connect with fan bases here in America so much more because he still has an interpreter. Like
Wow.
he's been in the league for a decade, I'm pretty sure. Um, or actually, no, not quite a decade because I think he was 2018. So like, but pretty close to it. And it's like I wish there would be people in his corner, and it's tough learning English. It's tough learning another language, but I think even Christian Pulisic, he's the captain of our U.S. men's national soccer team. He plays over in Europe, and I'm pretty sure he plays for a German team. I'm not a soccer guy or a football guy,
Yeah.
however you want to say it. I'm pretty sure he did part of his post game presser maybe a couple months ago in the native language. And
Praise God.
I think that stuff goes a really, really long way. And if we're just gonna kind of switch like Shohei and Christian Pulisic, how a fan base can be like, oh, I appreciate that effort and I feel like I can connect more um, with this person because they're integrating into the society that this sport is in. And again, this isn't like the biggest issue, but I feel like that helps with marketability. And I think maybe as we see a shift in culture, not just in politics, but in the workforce, but in sports, to be like, all right, maybe this DEI stuff and talking about race all the time and having people like LeBron James, Steph Curry, Greg Popovich, Steve Kerr, um, they're not helpful. And once these guys age out and retire, um, it's maybe going to be beneficial to the sport because people are going to be like, you know what? I'm watching, Anthony Edwards, and I really don't know where he's at politically. Like, it's like, I'm sure he's
Hmm.
like, he's not a Christian, and I don't agree with him morally, and he's done some, you know, you know, kind of wonky stuff, and even some evil stuff when it comes to coercing some chick to get that he knocked up to get an abortion. Can people get
Oof.
past that and just celebrate them as a basketball player? I mean, there's times where still, we need to speak up about things and speak up, courageously. But there's going to be other athletes to be like, I don't know what their politics are, and I kind of appreciate that. And
Hmm.
I'm just watching them and enjoying them, and I'm able to separate the art from the politics if they do bring up any aspect of politics. But people are sick and tired of the LeBron Jameses. They can't stand it. Like, this guy thinks he is so morally superior than everybody else and thinks he's doing something unbelievably courageous, and people can't stand it. There's a reason that he has millions of haters. There's a reason that
Yeah.
people can't stand LeBron James, and they look forward to, as they did this year, when he got knocked out in the first round, even though he was able to, slyly get Luka Doncic on his team in one of the most lopsided trades in the history of the National Basketball Association. People like that he got booted in the first round, and they enjoyed watching the NBA playoffs from there.
Okay, so I heard about this, but I didn't follow it. Maybe can you give me a little bit of background on what happened there? I just remember that the trade happened to Doncic and everyone was all up in arms about it, but I didn't really dig into what was going on and what people were upset about. Well, I did manage to pick up from the tenor of the conversation that something shady had happened, that it shouldn't have happened, but I couldn't figure out why. Like I was like, I didn't dig in to figure out what the angle was. Do you want to, we can just keep it between us. Do you want to tell
Ba-
me like what happened there from your perspective?
Basically, in layman's terms, Luka Doncic is the most exciting and yeah, he's the most exciting and probably the biggest young superstar in the NBA. He just took his team or his former team, the Dallas Mavericks, to the NBA Finals last year. And then
Hmm.
the Dallas Mavericks decided that, he's like kind of overweight and we're not willing to pay him, even though he just took our team to the NBA Finals. And someone like that would be or should be in an absolute blockbuster trade. He is an unbelievable player. And sure, maybe he's like his weight was a little bit of a problem, but it's like Luka or Nikola Jokic has definitely got a weight issue, but he's balling. No one's bringing up like
Hmm.
what's going on with him weight wise, but Luka Doncic didn't get shopped around. Usually that's what happens with these superstar players is multiple teams are interested. And then we found out that no other teams other than the Lakers knew that Luka Doncic was going to get traded. It just happened between them. That doesn't happen. And then LeBron James tried saying that he didn't know about it. And the worst part is not just, oh, that he got traded. He got traded for nothing. He got traded for Anthony Davis, who's an aging superstar who is like a China doll and constantly gets hurt. And you would expect like maybe like 3 or 4 first round picks. Like if people want to look up that Desmond Bain, who's never made an all-star team, he just got traded for another player, and 4 first-round picks. Like, Luka Doncic should get maybe one of the biggest trade hauls that we've seen in NBA history, but it was like for nothing. It was almost like they're like, he doesn't mean anything to us. Just take him. It just seemed like some of the most shady stuff I've ever seen in the league. And I think 100%, I'll put the tinfoil hat on. LeBron James is going to retire at some point. They also would
Oh, yeah.
love I think the big dogs at the NBA would love to see LeBron somehow get another ring. And LeBron seems to always team up with some of the best players in the NBA. But once LeBron retires, they want the Lakers to still be on the map. And who's going to keep them on the map? The biggest young superstar in the NBA, Luka Doncic. Like, it was just, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. And especially as we see other trades happening in the NBA, it was so lopsided. And for no teams to hear about it, it's a really shady. And I think that's another thing that actually hurts the reputation of the National Basketball Association is people saying, is this an inside job? Like, they're like, I'm not a conspiracy
Mm.
theorist. I'm not like some big, like, conservative conspiracy theorist, like Alex Jonesy NBA fan, like, but this is weird. And I think that's what it came down to. And then actually the Dallas Mavericks, I think they had like maybe less than 0.1% to get the first overall pick in the NBA draft. Guess who got the first overall pick? Dallas Mavericks. Like, it,
Oh,
it
wow.
starts it starts to become too much of a coincidence, and it's weird stuff. And I think that's another thing that hurts the credibility of a league like the NBA. It's weird.
So the NBA facilitated a lowball trade for a superstar to go to a brand name team to sort of take up the mantle of LeBron James. But this wouldn't have. It sounds like it wouldn't have happened without the NBA league, meddling to facilitate it. Right?
It's
The Mavericks wanted to offload their star player, and then they pulled some strings and made it happen.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, there's a lot of people out there that have been covering the NBA for a long time, and they have the inside scoop on stuff, and they'll try to discredit, basically the way that you and I have described it. But I think 100% that's happened. I mean, it's just,
Hmm.
I think it's definitely an inside job, and it's unprecedented what we saw, and I think it was just 100% thievery what we just saw, and I think that's where the NBA is scared right now that a lot of people aren't watching the NBA finals, though I've enjoyed the playoffs this year, actually maybe more than, you know, anything over the last, 5 years or so. Even being a Warriors fan, I've had a lot of great years watching my team. I think they want these big market teams to do really well because they think that's actually gonna be, what's best for business and get people to watch again. But at the same time, I think it hurts their credibility, and I think what happened was an inside job with that trade.
Hmm. I grew up during the era of Michael Jordan, Larry Bird, Magic Johnson, Steve Nash, Charles Barkley. Like that was my childhood. Jose Canseco and Mark McGuire, Bash
The Bash
Brothers,
Bros, yep.
and I actually hold on just a second. I want to show you something that I haven't gotten this out on the podcast yet before, but
Let's
I'll
see
show
it.
you. Hold on. This this is a Nolan Ryan rookie card.
No way.
This is his act. That's a real deal Nolan Ryan rookie card. You can see I've got in inch thick
Oh my.
Plexi. It's just
Are you gonna get
so
it graded?
I no, I suppose I could, but funny story about this card. So I was like, I don't know, maybe 8, 12 years old, something like that. And my uncle had a big box of old baseball cards, and he's like, you can pick any like 3 or 5 cards out of this. And so I happened to like Nolan Ryan at the time. And so I saw that card and I picked it. At the time, the card was worth like $100, something like that, with my baseball card. What was it? Beckett
Oh, yeah, Beckett, yeah.
baseball card value magazine. Yeah. And then after that, he got his 300th win and his 5,000th strikeout. And this card went went crazy in terms of its value. And so my my uncle has never forgiven me for that.
Oh,
But like, but this is It's super cool. I just have it back here chilling in my studio. It's the real deal.
Because I don't know if
Even
you could,
the base.
I don't know if you could see, Will, but I mean I collect cards. I'll even show you there. Like I have a bunch of my card collection here, and I've been
Oh wow.
collecting cards ever since I was a kid, and I got back into it um over this last year. And I kind of got back to the childhood love, and it's a big business, sports cards,
Yeah.
and there's a lot of people that, if anybody's unaware, like now there's like big products that come out that drop, and then there's people that actually do like box breaks, and people buy into that, and they're like, there's a rookie that I want to get on this team, and it's kind of like you're gambling essentially, because you don't know what's in the box, and you could potentially get a big card if you're like, I'm going to buy the Houston Texans for this amount of money. And then, a lot of like, and then in general, like there's a ton of big business behind sports cards. And it's been super fascinating learning more about that. And I don't know, I'd look up for you to see, if it's in really good condition, if you get it graded by PSA, that obviously just only skyrockets in value. Um,
Hmm.
based off the grade that it's going to get. But I think it's like sports cards are fun. That's another thing that I think gets kids like really into sports again. And there's obviously big business behind it, but at the same time, there's a lot of fun for kids that are just like, they just want to rip open a pack like we were when we were kids, and we have no idea how much these things are worth, and they're maybe not even worth anything, but it's like, oh, I got my favorite player. And I have some cards like that, when I was a kid, but cards are a blast.
They are, I mean, they were a huge deal when I was a kid. Like when I was, people loved them, kids loved
Mhm.
them. And then the market kind of blew up and then it crashed
Yep.
really hard as all these different manufacturers came in. But it sounds to me like baseball cards, sports cards are coming back now, which I mean, I saw something on Twitter about it, but I didn't pay much attention, but it's actually kind of cool to hear.
Yeah, it's cool
So that,
because it's like
go ahead.
it's a piece of art. Um,
Yeah.
and it's a piece of history, and that's where people can start to look at like, there's obviously was a time where there was so much overprinting, and now you have,
Yeah.
variations of cards, you got autograph cards, and, those things that become, basically life changing for people. Like I know for me, I actually ended up, you know, buying a Caitlin Clark card, and, got it graded, and it's a 10. And, it's like you buy that card for, which sounds crazy, a couple $100, and now it's worth, with a 10 grade, over 1,000. And if
Amazing.
Caitlin Clark keeps playing well and she wins an MVP or a championship, just like Nolan Ryan, you have some of those accolades, those blow up. And some of these can actually be way better investments than the stock market. Obviously, you're still,
Ah,
gambling with how well these guys go, but it is kind of crazy to see how like Shohei Otani cards have blown up, Aaron Judge even, and some of these other players. It's like, yeah, you hold on to them, you're going to see a bigger return on investment than you would with like going with Apple or something like that. Obviously, don't take all my financial advice, but the numbers are the numbers. Where you can kind of see like, hey, over the last year, there's been a bigger price increase for these cards and certain players. It's pretty cool to witness and look into.
yeah, and I think thinking back to, that's super awesome to hear. And I think back to my childhood watching sports, and it seemed that back then, and maybe this is true, maybe it's a nostalgia thing, but I just look back on older games, and it wasn't that the games weren't excellent or the players weren't amazing, but I think there's a way that sports today has become way more sophisticated and savvy and self-conscious than it used to be. Like I go back and I watch old NFL games and the guys are rugged and they're
Yep.
playing in the snow and it's just like it's a really gritty kind of game. You watch the NBA and it just there was like an endearing lack of self-awareness to sports that sports today now has. Like athletes are far more conscious, it seems, of being superstars and image management and like, the fashion show walk as they walk
Yep.
into games. And I don't think that's a good development. Egos are always going to be a problem at elite level sports, but this kind of like Travis Kelce's fashion show before the Super Bowl or something like that. Like,
Yeah.
and Tom Brady as well. And like, there's a way in which that can kind of be cheeky or fun, but there's a way in which it just seems to have lost some of its youthful innocence, I think, that makes it hard to engage with. And maybe that's why people aren't watching the NBA, because it's like, this isn't just a fun kids game anymore. This is big business, billions of dollars, egos, images on the line. And that takes something away from the purity of it. If every play you're thinking about, oh, is this going to get me on the highlight reel,
Yeah.
versus like, I need to win for my team.
Yeah, because I think that's multifaceted. There's times where, I think I've really enjoyed athletes being able to show their personality, maybe through their style. And then there's other times where it's like, that style is stupid. People need to look up Kyle Kuzma. Look up Kyle Kuzma. He's worn some of the wonkiest, weirdest stuff I have ever seen. But at times it's like, you know what? I can kind of appreciate, in a sense that this has become a fashion show, but it does get to that place where it's like, this is fairly egocentric. And there's a lot of
Mhm.
individualism in sports. And then we can go into the style of play, which is another thing that's really hurt the NBA. That's things that's actually hurt every single sports league. The NBA now, it's like, well, what's a travel? What's a foul? Because like guys are flopping around. Um, as much as I made like Luka Doncic, he flops. LeBron
Mm.
James is the king of the flop. That guy is a physical
Yeah, he
specimen and he
is.
flops around like he's a European soccer player. It's crazy. Um, but at the same time, too, it's just like SGA that plays for the OKC Thunder, he gets called a free throw merchant because he seems to draw a lot of fouls that just don't really seem to be fouls. And, the nitty gritty and physical aspect of the game, seems to be long gone. And then you go to the NFL, it seems like you even put a fingernail on a quarterback. Again, as much as I like Patrick Mahomes, and as much as maybe I didn't like Tom Brady because of what he did to my Falcons in the Super Bowl, but I always respected him. You put a fingernail on those guys, and it is an unsportsmanlike penalty. It's roughing the passer, and people get really upset that it seems like the aspect of the game that really drew us, from a physicality standpoint and a style of play standpoint, it's kind of ruining the game and it's ruining the experience. But at the same time, we have the most talented, athletic, physical specimens we've ever seen in sports. So that's where people are like, come
Oh,
on, like we see these feats of athleticism that are crazy. Like if you had people that are able to rise from the dead that played in the ABA and they could see how these guys are playing in the NBA now, they'd be like, what? Like it's crazy stuff. But there is an aspect of hyper individualism that does lead to things like load management. Load management is a term that's used for players specifically in the NBA that just kind of decide, you know what, I just want to take the day off. Like it's a long
uh,
season, just like I'm not hurt. I just kind of just feel like taking a day off. And then once
yeah,
again, I can't believe I'm doing two mentions of Colin Cowherd on on the podcast here, but he had another interesting point where he said the NBA and NBA athletes are losing the everyday American, similar to the Democrats, because you guys are telling these people where there's a father that has worked overtime for the last month or two just to afford to have his family of 4 or 5 just even get into the arena. And then he needs to buy them food and drinks. And then he finds
yeah,
out that his kid's favorite player just decided, I'm just going to sit out. Just don't feel like playing. Oh, the season's 82 games. It's so long. And we're seeing that like that's a major disconnect from the everyday American, just like the Democrat Party is seeing a disconnect from the everyday American in the way that they run things, in not only their policies, but their campaigns. And that I think comes from a lot of selfishness. Like we talked earlier about
yeah.
what are some of the amazing things that you learn foundational aspects of life that you learn in sports, one of it, one of them should be selflessness. Because the vast majority of us have either been around team sports or played team sports ourselves. And we can understand that how you practice and how you play, is more than just about yourself. Obviously, we eventually want athletes to get to the point where they're doing it for Christ, whether you're a young athlete or a pro athlete. But this individualism and selfishness is definitely hurting sports. And I think they're seeing a major disconnect between fans and players, especially since players are only going to continue to make more money. And I totally
Mm.
understand. And final word on this one is that these are valuable assets. You don't want to just go see Patrick Mahomes get beat up, your franchise player, maybe the second greatest quarterback in the history of football, get hurt unnecessarily. But there is times where it's like you play a tough sport. Quarterbacks should be able to be hit. Basketball players, you still play a physical sport. You shouldn't be flopping around like this and do a better job of being an actor than you are being a basketball player. And that's hopefully where people are starting to um, realize that you need to hold these leagues to account and say, like, what we're seeing here, we don't connect with. And we're the ones that are actually, paying big money to go to these games, buy these subscription packages so we could watch the games. And then that leads to hopefully more selflessness. But still at the same time, these guys are big brands. So I wouldn't expect much change, but hopefully we start to see a little bit of a cultural shift when it comes to the style of play and those kind of things.
I'm glad that you mentioned the selflessness, because what an incredible blessing from God, not just to have such physical gifts and the opportunity to cultivate them and the health to enjoy them, but also to have thousands or even millions of people who just want to watch you play a game.
Yeah.
And the mindset, I mean, I understand the pressures that are on every professional at an elite level. I get it. You know what I mean? Like, I understand just what a toll pro sports takes on the body of even someone who's healthy throughout their entire career. Like, it's a you expend your body for the love of a thing. But to have the attitude where it's like, you know what, I feel like taking a day off, when it's like there are there are people that want to see you play. Like, you've been given an incredible gift to have the opportunity to have the kind of career and make the kind of money that, like, only a small fraction of people will ever get, and you only get it for a short time. Like, you 35, 40, like, you're probably not going to be Tom Brady playing until you're 42 or
Yeah.
43, right? So, like, and so the idea that someone would say, or that players would consistently say, yeah, I'm just going to take a night off tonight, it seems to be kind of like squandering a gift of people's attention and their loyalty and their enthusiasm and their fandom. It just, again, I like that you called out the selfishness, because there's a lot of that to it, while acknowledging the challenges of the profession. Like, you get to play a game for a living. Like,
Yeah.
bring your all, bring it, show up. And yeah, I mean, I see all these things as maybe connected in a way.
Yeah, and people might be thinking like, "Well, is this actually, like, good for their body?" Because John, if you're bringing up that they are very valuable financial assets, doesn't this help protect their body? I haven't seen and nothing's been presented that shows that this is actually healthier for specifically if we're even talking about NBA players, that load management helps them. I think we're seeing more injuries than we ever have before. And obviously that can get
Mm.
into training and aspects, but specifically correlated to, like, even look it up. Load management is not leading to healthier players. It's leading to a lot of injuries. And it's leading to then these players actually being a disservice to not only their pocketbook, but the fan base and importantly their team, because they decided to make a selfish decision and just sit out. And like hopefully um leagues are going to start cracking down, because this also comes into an aspect of we're in an era of player empowerment. They have players have more power
Mm.
and more say than they've ever had. And there's a good aspect to that. And then there's also the aspect where they can be like, I just don't feel like it today, coach. And you can't tell me to play. And I've built up enough sweat equity and have a big enough fan base to where I can get away with this. And I know there was even times where I've said, there again, like to disconnect with everyday Americans, there are people out there grinding and they could never take a day off. They could never say to their boss, just don't feel like it today, boss man. It's just, I don't know, just doesn't feel like one of those days. They'd probably get fired.
I'm doing
They get fired
I'm
or
doing
they
load management.
yeah, it's load management today, boss man. Like, sorry, like, I need a personal day. I mean, you can maybe get away with that if you're a liberal and you're like, yeah, I'm just really going through a lot of Trump derangement syndrome today and I need to take a break. They could probably give you that day off. But if you're going to be like an athlete and be like, yeah, just, nah, can't do it today. You're like, all
Nah.
right, great. We'll find somebody that wants to be here all the time. Good luck. And then you can't provide for your family. Like, those are the
Yeah.
disconnects that we're talking about. And these guys are not playing enough games to where it's like, all right, maybe that kind of makes sense.
Right.
There's some tough stretches. And, even anybody that is, you've done plenty of traveling, Will, and like, yeah, so they might be in chartered flights, private flights, and it's cush, but it still gets tiring. But at the same time, like, these guys aren't playing games 82 days in a row. Like, these
Mhm.
guys have plenty of time to recover. They have some of the best doctors and physicians in the world around them. So yeah, this whole idea of I just want to take a day off, it's not working for the health of the player, and it's definitely not helping with the connection to the fan base. It doesn't work.
So where do you see, bearing in mind everything we've talked about, whether it be woke politics, load management, player empowerment, selfishness, all these different patterns, where do you see all this going? Because I look at this and I'm like, this is not sustainable. Like, I can't see this running out 5, 10 years and sports having the same place in American society that they once did. It just seems to be a losing kind of battle where, yeah, people will always watch, but the enjoyment won't be there. I especially appreciate how you brought up how expensive it is to go to games now. Not only the tickets are expensive, but
Mhm.
parking and food and beverages. It's quite an endeavor. And like, so I might as well watch it on TV and then be bombarded with woke advertising. Like, where does all of this go? Or
And
I have no idea.
and even too, it's expensive to watch sports on TV. Like,
Mm,
YouTube TV seems to raise their prices every single year. And then if you're out of market, you gotta buy, um, you know, it's not there's like NBA League Pass, and then there's, yeah, Sunday Ticket for the NFL, and then you need to get Prime to watch Thursday games. You'll need to get Peacock at times to watch some games. Like, it gets really expensive, but I think what leagues need to realize is I'm not asking for leagues to become, like, super conservative. We're not looking for the pendulum to swing, where it's like, talk about a
mhm,
bunch of conservative cultural issues. We just want
right.
sports to be as apolitical as possible. We do not need to talk about sexual identity, DEI, and race relations ad nauseum. Like, stop it. It doesn't work. And I truly believe people on the left, right, and center are saying, you know what? I might agree with some of these politics at times, but I just watch sports as an escape and I don't want to be lectured to. And if I wanted
Yeah.
politics, I will go to MSNBC, CNN, Fox News, Newsmax, News Nation, whatever. I don't go to sports to get this nonsense. I don't need it and I don't want it. And hopefully, what we're realizing too is with as much of a crazy place as X is, it is a bastion for free speech to where people can push back against the nonsense that we're seeing from specifically sports leagues and players and even networks. Places like ESPN have so many crazy liberals running around and trying to make everything about race. People are over
Hmm.
it. That's why ESPN is failing. The NBA, like
Yeah.
we talked before, it's hurt its brand. So they need to realize that politics, all this politics infused, and we're talking about left-wing politics, it doesn't work. People are over it. And hopefully we're gonna see more maybe middle of the road politically media members find their way um, into press conferences and working for teams and outlets to where they can actually just report on the game and maybe not gaslight us through politics at times. And I think at the same time, too, Christian athletes have an amazing opportunity to shift the culture in sports. There's a bunch of athletes, look them up. There's an amazing brand called, I think it's called Jesus One Apparel, WON. And then they have team specific Jesus One shirts. And there's a lot of players, like a bunch of players from Ohio State's football team that won the national championship were wearing those. A lot of guys in the MLB, like one of the guys, one of the pitchers, and probably the best pitcher on the San Francisco Giants, obviously a crazy liberal area. He did a appearance on MLB Network and he wore a Jesus One, kind of
Hmm.
in the San Francisco Giants lettering t-shirt on the broadcast. These kind of things, we need to elevate those Christian athletes. We need to say, you know what? God is in every aspect of society. And it seems like there's a lot of bold Christians in sports. Elevate the CJ Strouds, the Brock Purdy's, Jonathan Isaac. And as much as I may disagree with my buddy Harrison Butker on religion when it comes to me being a Protestant and him being a Roman Catholic, he is an awesome guy that stands up for a lot of truth and is a really good dude preaching a ton of good stuff. And I think
Hmm.
he's an athlete that I would love to see elevated more, and hopefully leagues and teams and outlets and brands realize that the woke mob is not powerful. Last thing I'll say is, even if we go back to Caitlin Clark, when Nike decides to grow a pair and finally come out with a pair of Caitlin Clark shoes, those will sell better than any shoes since Michael Jordan. But they are afraid right now to upset athletes like Aja Wilson, who is a black athlete that talks so much about black empowerment stuff. But when companies realize, you know what? Forget it. Caitlin Clark is the biggest sports star in the world right now. The biggest sports star we've seen maybe in a generation, maybe since LeBron James. Um, that we need to come out with a pair of shoes. This is about what the consumer wants. Leave the politics to the side, let people enjoy it, and stop allowing the woke mob to dictate how you run your business. And I think from there, we'll hopefully see a shift. And hopefully, anybody that was watching this, I hope it was interesting because I know there's plenty of times where I can go off on sports and you and other people might be like, what language is this guy talking right now? I have no idea who these people are, what he's talking about, but I love sports. And I would very least hope that sports is a place where people can feel like is a really good outlet away from politics and the craziness of life. Where you could go to a baseball game and be like, I don't feel like I should worry about bringing my kids here. Like they're pushing some nonsense. I'm here to watch some amazing athletes, drink a beer, have a hot dog, enjoy time with my friends and family, and that's it. Like I hope that's where we can get sports back to as much as possible.
Amen, brother. I'm right there with you. And certainly I've greatly appreciated this. I appreciate everything that you talk about because you open the door for me to have a greater appreciation of sports through your passion and your enthusiasm. And so like I love watching sports. I enjoy it. It's never been something that I've been as enthusiastic about it as you are, but your enthusiasm is infectious and you talk about sports the way I want to hear them talked about. You see things the way that I see them. And so for that, you provide a doorway into enjoying sports that I don't find anywhere else. So I appreciate you and I appreciate everything that you have to say.
I appreciate it. Yeah. Again, God's given me an amazing platform, and it's crazy with his sovereign plan. I would have never expected being where I am and, being able to speak about these things, you know, without getting canceled again. Like I have the ability to make a
Yeah.
living, to talk about things that I really enjoy, and connect with great people like you. And I really really enjoy it. And I hope that people will join the fight for sports. Even from the level of women's sports, what's going on there. Like even simply, sharing something to your Instagram story can spark a good conversation. Obviously, it's a heavy political time where things can get crazy, but these are things we should fight for, especially for the next generation. I think sports, again, can be a major cultural driver. And again, always on my platform, I am willing and able to promote Christ being glorified in sports. And I think it will continue to resonate with millions of people.
And I agree with that. And I see that every day from you and I appreciate it. So maybe we'll just close on this. For people listening, what can they do? What can they do in the sports that they watch, the things that they say? Like how can they participate in bringing sports more in the direction of what we've been talking about or bringing it back to something that it was in a previous era?
I think people need to realize, like, for example, if you're living in the San Francisco Bay Area, that's where I was born again. That's where I was living before I moved out here. I moved out here to Phoenix, Arizona in 2020. They're having a thing called a fellowship night. Teams have like faith and family night. So it's basically their Christian night, but it's not a stadium wide celebrated thing. All the
Mm.
athletes don't need to wear crosses on their jerseys like they do for Pride. But there's times where you can actually reach out, maybe even as a season ticket holder and a fan, and be like, why can't we just call this Christian night? Like, why can't we just
Mm.
call this Christian night? It's not a big deal to have like a stadium wide thing, but I'd appreciate, the ability for the Christian athletes on the team to be able to boldly say, like, hey, Christian night is coming up, not just like fellowship night and using, vague language with these things. But again, like you as a sports fan out there listening and watching, you have a lot of power. Teams and organizations and leagues are shifting what they're doing because they're realizing that what they're doing isn't working. And
Mm.
it's not like every single team needs to have a Christ is King night, or like, put that in their bio. That it needs to get to a point where it's like, hey, let's get back to sports. They're an outlet away from politics and the craziness of life. It's a unifying outlet, and I want to get back to that place. And there is a lot of power there. And I would say too, you have the ability to make a huge influence online, even if you are just like a micro influencer. Some of the conversations you have with just your couple hundred followers can actually make more of an impact than sometimes like Will and I can have. Sometimes I just don't
Mhm.
have the personal relationship. Like I might have a good amount of people that follow me, but I just can't have that personal relationship that you guys do. Um, and at the same time, too, please do everything you can to amplify Christian athletes. Leagues, teams, organizations, and networks will continue to take note that, you know, this is cool. Like, this is actually something that resonates with fans. And the other stuff that we're pushing, it doesn't. So I hope people know that, they don't just need to sit back and hope that things get better. There's actually some actions you can take. And for anybody that follows me, I always appreciate the support. It means a lot. I make a living on social media, so like anytime people interact with my stuff, share, follow, like it means a lot to me and my family as I continue to move forward and try to figure out, this crazy life of an independent content creator. So it's a blessing. And I hope more than anything, sports can be a place where you can go to a game and say, I had a great time with Joe over here. I met Susan over here. They interacted with my family. I couldn't tell you what their socioeconomic background is. No idea how they voted. Don't know where their sexual identity is, but they were rooting for the A's and they were rooting for the Diamondbacks, and I had a great time. That's what sports should be about. And I hope we can get back to a place like that where we can really lock arms as Americans and have a great time watching sports and digesting sports and interacting with sports.
Amen, brother. What a beautiful vision. Wonderful. So where can people find out more about you and what you do, and how can they support you?
You guys can follow me on X and Instagram and TikTok. Those are where I post a lot about sports, faith, and cultural topics. And it's at Johnny Root _. If you want to find out more about me and what I've done throughout my career, some other content and conversations that I've had, you guys can go to johnrootlive.com.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jon. This has been excellent and very inspiring.
Yeah, man. Well, thank you.